Across lifetimes and continents, two souls are bound by a curse, drawn by a love that defies reason and memory. But fate is never kind, and time itself conspires to keep them apart. Now, in a world that's forgotten its ancient promises, destiny has brought them together once more. But can love break a curse woven by gods and betrayal? Or will the cycle of pain repeat forever? The sun rained mercilessly over the golden sands of Kemet, where the Nile flowed like a sacred vein through the heart of the world. In the cradle of gods and kings, where obelisks pierced the sky and chants echoed through incense-thick temples, two souls lived outside the reach of time. Callan, guardian of the desert winds, stood tall and silent atop the cliffs, his form wrapped in desert robes that rippled like dunes in motion. His eyes, endless and ancient, watched the horizon as though expecting something, someone. The wind, his companion, whispered secrets in his ear, brushing against him with familiar longing. Below, within the sacred walls of the Temple of Life, Amara, high priestess chosen by Montat herself, moved to columns bathed in golden light. She was a woman of grace and poise, yet her presence carried more than mortal charm. Her eyes were pools of obsidian mystery, framed by kohl and burdened by longing she could never explain. When she offered prayers before the altar, her voice trembled not with fear, but with yearning. To those who watched, she was the embodiment of divine beauty and serenity. To the gods, she was a soul marked by something even they did not dare to name. Their love was not born in thunder or war, but in the quiet. It bloomed where the reeds met the river, beneath the moon's soft glow, behind the temple veils and secret glances. It was in the offering of water cupped in Amara's hands, pressed to Callan's lips, in the stillness after rituals when the world paused and their hands touched as if by accident, lingering too long. It was sacred and unspoken, for love between guardian and priestess defied tradition, and worse, threatened power. And power in Egypt was never left unchecked. Prince Seta, third son of Pharaoh Menek, held a gaze as sharp as a vulture's, and a sharp rotted by envy. He watched them from shadows, his lust for Amara fermenting into madness, his hatred of Callan igniting like desert fire. When charm failed and status proved insufficient, Seta turned to darker means. Deep within forgotten catacombs where the walls bled curses and old gods lay restless, he made a pact not with the gods of the land, but with the broken things buried beneath it. Under a moon tinted like coagulated blood, he enacted the ritual. He did not seek to kill him, that would be mercy. Instead, he cursed their very souls. With every word, with every syllable spat through cracked lips and trembling hands, he bound them to the cruelest fate, eternal recurrence. They would live again and again, but never whole, never together. Their memories would shatter at birth, their hearts aching with a grief they cannot name, pulled to one another across lives, only to lose each other once more. The spell shattered the night like a scream in the dark. Callan fell first, gasping as the desert winds turned on him. No longer his allies, but mourners. Amara collapsed beside the sacred flame, her voice lost amid prayer, eyes wide with unspoken knowing. The world held its breath, the curse was done, and so began the cycle. Through rising kingdoms and falling empires they walked, sometimes near, sometimes a world apart. A soldier glimpsing a dancer across a battlefield, a nurse tending a stranger in a war hospital, a painter haunted by the face he could never remember how to draw. Each life a flicker, each death a silence, and yet always a whisper remained, a whisper of the past. The rain fell in sheets, blurring the city into watercolor. New York pulsed with life around Cal Matthews, a 34-year-old history professor with tired eyes, short dark hair still damp from the storm, and a charcoal wool coat clinging to his tall frame. He had spent the morning lost in books and museum archives, chasing fragments of a recurring dream he couldn't explain. One of sand, fire, and a woman whose voice echoed in the corners of his mind like a forgotten hymn. When he stepped into the coffee shop on the corner of 3rd and Haverly, the bell above the door chimed softly, muffled by the storm outside. The scent of roasted beans and old wood greeted him, warm and familiar, like a place he had never been, yet somehow remembered. He shook off his coat absently, joining the slow-moving line that snaked toward the counter, his fingers brushing the strap of his satchel. Outside, the street shimmered reflections. Inside, time seemed to hesitate. She sat by the rain-speckled window, one hand curled around a paper cup, the other turning the page of a worn paperback. Her long, dark auburn hair fell in soft waves over a light gray cardigan, and her hazel eyes scanned the page with quiet focus. She looked up just briefly, absently, casually, and smiled to herself, as if the words had whispered something kind. To anyone else, she was just a woman enjoying a quiet moment, but to Cal, she was a star reborn. The room fell away. Flashes exploded behind his eyes, flooded temples under moonlight, the scent of desert jasmine, her voice speaking his name in a language the world had forgotten. He staggered back a step, one hand gripping the side of the counter to steady himself. The memories didn't come as words, they came as emotion, as longing, as pain. An ache bloomed in his chest, powerful and ancient, cracking open a heart that had been unknowingly sealed for centuries. He had found her. He wanted to move, to speak, to collapse at her feet and beg for something neither of them could name. But then it happened. A man, early 40s, with a kind face and gentle eyes, leaned over her and kissed Emma's cheek. She smiled wider, her fingers brushing his arm with affection. 2 children, 1 boy, 1 girl, ran up beside her, laughing as they waved off the rain from their jackets. Emma gathered them in her arms, pressing her lips to their wet hair. Cal felt the world split. He stood in the middle of the cafe, motionless. It wasn't jealousy that gripped him, but grief, a quiet, soul-deep sorrow that whispered, "She is happy." And even if she didn't remember why, even if she didn't know who he was, that happiness was real. His hand trembled at his side, his lips parted to speak, but no sound came. He turned, heart clenched like a fist, and walked back into the rain. The cold welcomed him like an old friend. As thunder rolled over the city, Cal didn't look back. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't dare. Fate had found them, but fate was never kind. Cal's days crawled by, heavy with unspoken truths. His lectures became fragmented, his nights restless. His students noticed, though they said nothing. He was distracted, untethered. His mind, once precise and methodical, now drifted to a woman he barely knew, but somehow could never forget. Each afternoon, he returned to the coffee shop on 3rd and Haverly, like a ghost retracing his death. He never stepped inside. Instead, he watched from the shadows. Alleyways slick with rain, parked cars cloaked in condensation, windows of nearby shops where the reflection of her smile tormented him. Emma Wells was radiant in her ordinary life, her laughter, the tilt of her head as she read, the way she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. It was all agony and beauty at once. He hated himself for watching, hated the hunger in his soul that refused to be silenced. But what would he say if he approached her? That in another life they stood in temples long since buried, that their love once defied the will of kings and gods, that her heart belonged to him and his to her, across every life they'd suffered through. It sounded mad. Worse, it would rob her of the peace she had earned, and he had no right. Still, his instincts howled in protest. They whispered that fate didn't reunite souls for nothing. Across the city, Emma stirred in the grip of dreams she couldn't name. Night after night, her slumber cracked open like a tomb, revealing fragments of a world she did not remember, but mourned nonetheless. She stood barefoot on burning sand, veiled in linen and moonlight, while a faceless man reached for her from the shadows, his voice low and filled with promise, calling her by her name, not the one she bore now, but something older, softer, Amara. She awoke each morning with wet cheeks and trembling hands. Her husband noticed the fatigue behind her eyes, the distant look she wore like armor. "Bad dreams again?" he asked one night, his hands resting on hers. She nodded and smiled, masking the ache with practiced ease. But inside, something cracked. Emma found herself returning to the coffee shop, not for the coffee, not even for the reading, but for something else. Some pull, some absence she could not name. She told herself it was a break from routine, a quiet space for peace, but the truth lay hidden in the rhythm of her heartbeat. Every time the door opened, she was waiting. But for whom? The universe stirred quietly, like the deep breath before storm. Something ancient moved beneath the surface of their lives, stretching its limbs through time and memory. Cal stood outside, soaking in her image, as if it were air. Emma sat inside, searching the faces of strangers as though one might fit the shape of her dreams. And somewhere, beyond them both, the thread of destiny pulled taut. The gods had not forgotten, and fate, patient and relentless, was preparing its hand. It was a Tuesday, gray, unassuming, draped in drizzle, and the soft hush of tires on wet pavement. The world moved on as always. Businessmen hunched under umbrellas, school children darting past puddles, and traffic lights blinking in rhythm with the city's pulse. Emma sat in her usual spot at the fogged window of the coffee shop, a worn paperback open in her hands. She wasn't reading, not really. The words blurred, drifting past her eyes without landing. She had read this chapter 3 times and still couldn't recall a word of it. Something inside her fidgeted, coiled tight like a spring. The dreams had worsened, more vivid, more visceral. She heard his voice in the wind now, felt the brush of his fingertips in the warmth of the sunlight. The ache in her chest grew heavier each day, not like illness, but like longing, like something had been taken, and her soul hadn't stopped reaching for it since. Then it happened. She looked up, drawn by a presence she didn't understand, but had always known. Across the street, partially obscured by a drifting plume of steam from a city grate, stood Cal Matthews, his dark coat soaked through, hair clinging to his brow, and eyes locked onto hers. Time didn't slow. It stopped. 100 lifetimes surged forward at once, the sands of ancient deserts, the rush of sacred wind, firelit temples echoing with chants. She saw herself kneeling beside a dying man as the stars blinked overhead. She saw kisses pressed beneath full moons, promises made in trembling voices, and final goodbyes that tore through their souls in half. She remembered it all, not as dreams, but as truth. Her breath hitched, the book slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. The entire shop faded into silence. "Wait," she cried, heart racing, chair crashing behind her as she bolted upright. Her knees were weak, legs trembling, but she pushed forward, dodging past startled patrons and slinging her bag over her shoulder without care. Her eyes never left him, but Cal, he was already turning. He had seen it too, felt it, the connection that pulsed through the air like a live wire. For a moment, he had believed, hoped, but then he saw her hand, the faint line of a wedding band glinting beneath the soft cafe light, and the image of her children's laughter echoed in his mind. The guilt surged like a wave. He was a shadow from another time, a ghost of something that could never be real again. So he ran, down the block through the fogged intersections and dripping alleyways swallowed by the city's labyrinth. He didn't see the people around him or hear the calls behind him. His heart thundered with grief and love and self-hate, all braided into one impossible storm. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't face her. Not now, not like this. But Emma was not the woman she once was. She wouldn't let the curse claim them again. Not now, not when fate had finally broken through the veil. She tore through the door into the rain, eyes scanning every street and shadow. She would find him, because this time, she remembered. The city grew colder as autumn crept in, painting the leaves in fiery hues that whispered of change. Emma, once content in a world of structure and soft certainties, now moved like a woman untethered. Her hazel eyes, once so calm, now searched every passing face with restless desperation. Her friends called it a phase. Her husband, once patient, became distant. Their arguments bloomed in hushed voices after the children were asleep. In silences at the breakfast table, she tried to explain, but how could she? How could she put into words the knowledge that her soul had belonged to another across millennia? She loved her family, she did. The thought of her children's laughter still lit her heart like a lantern in the dark. But now she lived with the knowledge too vast to ignore. Love written before language, carved into temples long buried beneath sand and time. A part of her had awakened, and it cried out across ages for the one who once made her whole. She returned to the coffee shop every day, heart leaping at every customer who entered. She walked miles through the city, visited museums, archives, bookstores, anywhere that held traces of the ancient world. She placed a classified ad in the paper, not with his name. She didn't know what name he used now, but with a phrase that came from her dreams. Where the wind meets the stars, I will wait. Weeks passed. Then one evening, just as dusk softened the hard lines of the city into shadows and golden light, she entered the edge of the old city park. Trees stripped of summer arched like cathedral pillars above. The wind had stilled. The world seemed to hold its breath. And there he was. Kyle Matthews, clad in a worn coat, sat slouched on a wooden bench beneath the first emerging stars. His eyes, tired and distant, stared skyward, as though the constellations might offer absolution. He had tried to forget, tried to bury the pain beneath rational thought and long walks and unread books, but her face haunted him. Not just Emma's, but Amara's, the woman who once lit incense and whispered his name in a temple long swallowed by time. He hadn't slept in days. Footsteps approached, soft, hesitant. He turned. She stood before him, framed in lamplight and shadows, her hair loose, her eyes brimming. The moment stretched, timeless and fragile. She opened her mouth, but for a second no words came. Then with a trembling voice that wrapped the past, present and future into one breath, she said, "I remember." Kyle's heart stopped, and then it began again. Truly began, for the first time in countless lives. The weight he had carried for centuries, the silent ache of all their missed chances, fell away in a single exhale. He rose, barely breathing, afraid the world would shatter if he moved too quickly. They stood close now, closer than the space between them could account for. No apologies, no explanations. There was no need. Their eyes said everything. Their hands found each other, warm and real. And beneath the starless sky, where wind met silence, they stood together, not as strangers, not as ghosts, but as two souls who would finally come home. This time, no gods, no curses, no lifetimes could sever them again. They were whole, at last.